Hello and welcome back. Yes, I am sitting on the floor because I don't have a tripod yet. This is another video on the series about how to learn Japanese using different methods. My previous video in this series was how to study Japanese using Netflix, and if you're interested in that, I'll leave a link down below. This time, it's going to be on how to learn Japanese using video games. Video games are something that I love and probably wouldn't have so much interest in Japan if it were not for video games. Many games that I love and play, as I'm sure you, come from Japan, and one in particular kind of sparked my interest in this video topic because when I came to Japan, I started noticing a lot of similarities in Final Fantasy VII, actually. And growing up, I did not realize that Final Fantasy VII actually still has, and maybe many other games in the series, still has a lot of Japanese characters written within the game. If you look around at various locations, you can find them. And that kind of reignited my interest, I guess, in studying the language, and I felt kind of more excited and engaged in it. I personally feel that video games are a great way to study language and to increase the amount of engagement that you have in the language and increase your interest, the fun that you're having, and if you can do all that, I believe that you are going to learn a lot easier, kind of, in a way, but you're at least going to learn a lot without feeling like you're learning as much. But it's not just me that says that. There is other research out there. When I was doing my last semester in school, I found research where people had created a game for language learning and found that it increased students' engagement a lot in the language and thus increased the retention of the material that they were studying. You're increasing the amount of time that you're studying. You're also going to increase the engagement in it because you want to study this way and you want to have fun playing the game. The other thing, though, I would like to mention that this is not just play the video game and learn the language. If you already have a really good grasp on the language, I guess that would kind of work, but this still requires effort and this still requires studying. All that being said, if you are a very beginner at studying Japanese, this method is probably not for you. Similar to the Netflix video method, it's going to require at least a basic knowledge of Japanese grammar, and I would recommend that you should get through the Genki series books before you attempt doing this, because you're going to have to learn so much on the side of just words, which is what this process is kind of aimed at, that it's probably going to slow your process down to almost a halt, and it's going to maybe make you a little bit more uninterested in continuing studying this way. Just because it's gonna be a lot of effort. But if you do have a grasp of the language, this is a really good way to study using the language. It's something that I've been doing. Now, if you are here from the Netflix video and you have seen that video, this video is actually gonna be very similar to it with only just a small amount of differences and things that I added on to enhance this process overall, and things that I found throughout my years in college studying Japanese, that these processes actually helped me a lot more than many normal ones, but I'll get to that. Well, starting off, you're of course going to want to load up your game of choice. I chose Wind Waker on GameCube, so some of the footage might be a little bit blurry for people's standards today now in gaming, but I chose Zelda specifically just because I really liked the Zelda series and I wanted to play Wind Waker so bad that I actually bought a GameCube here in Japan and bought Wind Waker, which was surprisingly cheap compared to the ones in the States. My recommendations to you would be maybe something, you could either do Zelda, like I have been doing, or pick something that's more of like a daily life type of game, something that's a little bit more current era, or, you know, a game that you really want to play, but maybe a game even like Persona, maybe that series would actually be pretty good in Japanese, although could be a bit difficult. It seems like it would be difficult because the game itself is already difficult. Another really important tip, by the way, in this process, pick a game that has furigana. And if you don't know what furigana is, that is the small characters above kanji. If you don't know a kanji, it's sometimes really difficult to pick it out. Especially for me on this older game, the kanji is just incredibly blurry. I was trying to do it on my TV and it was not working out. That was horrible. However, because the furigana was there, I didn't need to know that kanji. I could read the game and understand it without paying attention to the kanji, which I do think is important. You should pay attention to the kanji and you should learn the kanji. However, when you're trying to learn the sentence, the kanji can really be something that gets in the way and something that really halts your progress, because now you have to draw the kanji and figure it out somewhere else, and that has always slowed me down a lot. Some games even too have a setting that you can select, like kids mode or something like that, and you can select it and it will either take the kanji away or it will turn furigana on. I could be wrong, but I think someone did tell me that the older Final Fantasy games have that option. I have not seen that in Final Fantasy VII or Crisis Core, which I have played in Japanese a little bit. I didn't see any sort of setting like that, but I have heard that it is in some games. Another option that you can do is pick a game that is for kids. If you don't feel like your vocab is that high yet, pick like a easy game. Like for instance, I think Wind Waker is totally doable. If you can get a copy of Japanese Wind Waker, go for it. But I do have some tips on what game you should choose in general. Choose a game that waits for you to press the A button before moving on to the next sentence, like Zelda. I will sometimes be at the same sentence for several minutes while I'm writing down vocabulary I didn't know and translating it and figuring out what they said. So you don't want a game that's going to rush you through everything or has cutscenes for every part of the game that's going to move through speech so that you can't really study it and move through the game like that. And you'll end up just lost probably in gameplay as well as in the language in the game, and it'll throw off your whole experience. You really want something like Pokemon or something like the older Final Fantasy games. You want something that is going to wait for you. Now, how you do this is you're going to want to talk to a character, and every word that you don't know, you're going to want to pull it out of the game and write it down. I wrote it down on my iPad. You could totally write it in a book. I chose to write it on my iPad because it would also find the kanji for me, so I didn't have to handwrite any kanji, and I could take that from the iPad directly into a website like Google Translate or Jisho or something like that to really simplify the whole process. There's a lot of people that like paper, and if you like doing everything on paper, that's totally fine. I believe in simplifying every difficult process that you have to the most simple version so that you can do it with ease. You don't want any added bulk and extra difficulty to things. And you know, say if you have a whole deck of flashcards and now you got this like giant stack of flashcards, you're not even studying it. Just, I would recommend doing it digitally. You can even do this on your phone. You don't need an iPad. So what I do is I will sit down, write down all the words, right, that I don't know, and put them into my list. And I actually do separate them by verbs, adjectives, nouns. I don't get too specific, like you have like transitive verbs and stuff like that. Like I don't get into that. If it's a verb, it's a verb. Where I do start to separate it for gameplay reasons is for items. I actually put items and stuff like that in its own category as well, because you're gonna constantly run into your items, and if you just keep forgetting what an item is, it's pretty obvious in some games it has a picture, but if you keep forgetting what it is, you're not gonna know what that is. But so I put them in an items list. Now, after that, I make sure that I write the kanji and the hiragana. I try and keep it organized by the first side is where it is how it shows up in the game, so that I can go back through that part of the game if I wanted to, and it's a little bit easier of a process to study for me. Now, after I've written the hiragana and the kanji for it, I now move on to, next to it, I put the English translation for that word. Now, something that I highly recommend is, seems kind of common sense, but you should avoid Google Translate. Google Translate helps sometimes, and I think it's better when there's a full sentence. It kind of will understand what it's saying more. It's even better if you use the kanji inside of Google Translate, but sometimes Google Translate gives me a very, not necessarily wrong, but not a good definition of the word. It maybe leaves out some sort of context or some meaning to why that word is the same as many other words and what's different about this word specifically. it gives no information. It's just going to translate the word. So I recommend that you use one of the more popular sites like Jisho. Jisho will give you a little bit more of an explanation on each word and synonyms to them and how it's used in a sentence. Things like that are really important to you really understanding the language. And because I use Jisho for that, I do often write down the synonyms next to it. If it's a word that I think could mean a couple things, I'll write all of those down in that list so that I can use it in several situations, because sometimes there is a word that you can use here, and although it's the same word, just for example, if it's a pan, you know, and you can use pan here when you're cooking, but if you were to talk about a different type of pan, you can't call this one also a pan, you know, like, so you have to sometimes be a little specific or list more information, and it's only going to help you in the future. So it seems like it takes a little bit extra effort, and it does, but in the long run, that's going to help you actually seem like you really know what you're talking about, because with Japanese, there's so many incorrect translations and things that just don't translate well. And so you end up thinking that you know, and I've experienced this several times, and then you realize, like, I don't know. There's a reason why those two words are different, and I chose to use one of them, or I didn't know the other one, but there's a reason why there's multiple words for the same word, because they all have a really different meaning. Now, after you've gathered what you feel like is enough words that you'd want to study in like a little bulk session, what I do is I actually will just save the game and shut it off. I don't even usually get that far in the game. I don't progress too far, but I like to get like a page or so of words down. And then what I will do is I will go and take all of those words and put them into Quizlet. Or you can use Anki if you like, you know, any sort of flashcard app. Personally, I prefer Quizlet, and I will tell you why right now. Anki felt a little bit too difficult, and it was cool because it is backed by science, the way that it makes you study. In my opinion, it wasn't good enough for me to use it and stay engaged with the app. The UI is kind of basic, and I didn't have that great of an experience on it, which is kind of a bummer because I think it was like $30 on the App Store, but it's okay. I got it, I tried it out, didn't care for it that much. Me and my friend were even making different flashcard sets together, but it just wasn't my thing. I went back to Quizlet. The reason why I like Quizlet is because when you're putting things into Quizlet, sometimes it gives you an option of what the word is, and it already has it, so you don't have to sit there and type everything out. I find it's kind of rare for me to have that, but it was more common when I was in school. The cool thing about Quizlet is not only is it a flashcard app and you can study your flashcards, but it also has games in there. So again, you can gamify your learning experience one more time while you're learning flashcards. And I really liked using the matching game. I played that all the time. And I especially played it like when I was walking around in school. I played it when I had a minute and was just sitting and drinking a coffee. I played it a lot, to the point where I noticed that the matching game, more than most things, in most ways that I was studying, or most ways that I was taught to study, the matching game was helping me way more, even more than just studying the basic flashcard. So I would study the flashcards a bit, and then I would go to match game, and I would play like 5 or 6 of them. And then I might study the flashcards again, but I would usually like call that good and put a break on it. And then later I would do the same thing. I would just run through the flashcards real quick, and then I would play the match game like several times. And I was constantly trying to beat my score. And the score being there and your speed, I think, is what kept me kind of competitive against myself and engaged in trying to get them correct. And I found that that greatly improved my reading scores on the kanji quiz. Didn't really improve my writing scores too much. You know, that's something that you just have to do. You have to write that. And if people are interested, I might make a video on writing kanji, but that was not my strong suit because I gave it the least amount of attention, because I was more focused on learning how to read. Because I felt in my first few years of studying kanji, I was able to write a lot of kanji, and I felt really proud of that. But it didn't really get me anywhere as far as learning how to read the kanji. Like, I was learning slower because I was focusing so much on writing. The goal with this whole process is for you to amass a large amount of vocabulary from a single source, which is that game that you chose. I recommend not buying a ton of games in Japanese and trying to study a bunch of different ones, unless you want to, I guess you could. I just recommend sticking to the one, because it's going to help you focus and you're going to be involved in the world more. I thought it was so cool, especially when I don't have the opportunity to go speak Japanese with people or go out in town and interact and try and buy something at a store using Japanese. I sometimes would pretend that I'm talking to the character, and then then I would click next and read what they say, translate it, figure it out, and then read through it and make sure that I understood it, and then move to the next thing. And it was a fun way to engage in the language without the opportunity to do so in real life. And I found that this increased my desire to study Japanese again. After school, I found that I kind of lacked the same desire to study Japanese. It kind of faded a little bit, where I was like, I just don't feel like doing that. I think I got really burnt out through the last semester, which is a story for another time. But the point is to be able to do all of that with a smaller amount of effort, something that feels more fun. When you put that amount of effort into this process, I think it's going to feel more fun, engaging, and I think you're going to find that you're studying without really feeling like you're studying, because I myself don't like studying. I don't like sitting down and thinking time to study, because then I will do everything but that. And I'm just that kind of person. If I sit down to make a video and think I'm gonna make a video, I end up doing everything but that. So I think that this process will help a lot of people if you're similar to me at all. I think it's a great idea. And I think one of the coolest part of these things, especially if you're me, you have a little bit of harder time focusing, you're kind of pulling words in small bursts, because what you're doing is you're talking to a character. You're pulling the words out. You're studying that, or you're at least just putting it in the list after you figured out what they said. And then after that, if you don't want to talk to someone just yet, you can go run around, get in a fight with a bad guy, cut some grass, like you can go do other things in the game, and then return to talking to people, progressing in the story, practicing Japanese. So like, you have chances to move around in this world, and if you put your mind in the mind of the character, you don't need to go to Japan. In that sense, you kind of. But I think this is a great opportunity to engage in the language rather than just simply reading a textbook or something like that, which I do recommend you do. I think that before you get into these different processes and finding your style of studying, I think it's better that you get a base grammar set down so that you at least can work your way around the sentence. I think it's important because if you don't know what the verb is, or where the word ends, or which is a noun in the placement of things, this process will probably be a lot more challenging. You'll probably end up writing the whole sentence and translating the whole sentence and trying to figure out what words are what and where the particles are. I don't recommend it. I really do recommend that you learn some Japanese first and then try these different study methods. But with that, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video as much as you liked the Netflix one, although the process is pretty similar. I think the most important thing is to stay engaged, have fun, find different ways to study that keeps you enjoying studying the language, and through time and repetition and studying, you will have a better experience overall, and before you know it, you're going to know a lot of words. You're going to be speaking Japanese more fluently. It's going to be a great time. So thank you for watching again, and I will see you next time.